Well, welcome, and thanks to Sarah and everybody else who organized this lovely show. It's a really important meeting, and I'm an optimist, so maybe I'll leave you with some words of hope. I mean, it's a pretty dire situation out there, but I'm optimistic that we will be able to make it through it. I mean, we're not going to recover the world as it was, and we are losing species and people at a pretty unprecedented rate. But there's hope. That's why you're here, right? I mean, I don't know who would get up on a Friday morning to hear crappy stories about war and everything else. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you sort of around the issue of compassionate conservation. And the reason I like talking about it here is because it's a movement that's worldwide, and it's really, I call it interdisciplinary, but somebody said that the real PC word is transdisciplinary now. Who cares, right? It's just bringing together different fields like biology and psychology and sociology, conservation psychology, conservation social work, and the work that's being done at the School of Social Work here is really the best in the world, and I'm not just saying that because they told me to. But it really is. I mean, whenever I travel, I talk about it, and as time goes on, more and more people ask me about it. So they're just discovering the work that's being done here on their own. And really, I think I like to say that all the problems in the world really are social work problems. I mean, they just really are. We don't need any more science to know what we're doing. We need to work with people, and we need to understand how people think and how they feel and how we can motivate them to act. So I really think the program here is just, it's the best. It really is. So some of the things that I've been thinking about, and I'm going to skip some slides because I tried to modify my PowerPoint last night, and I'm technologically impaired. And so I'm glad I had a backup because I wound up deleting the first one. But are animals ever really free? I did a book called Wild Justice with Jessica Pierce, and we're writing a book now on what we call autonomy, which is like the $10 word for freedom. Are animals free? Are they ever independent? And really, there's some surprising answers. So for example, there may be some free wild animals, but I don't think there's any free wild animals, even those who live 37,000 feet below the ocean. And certainly, what we call wild animals, it's sort of a relative term. I also do a lot of work at dog parks because I like watching dogs play. And I love hearing people say, oh, my dog, I love bringing my dog here. He's really free. And then they interrupt the play at least 10 times an hour. So I really point that out. And I think it's a really important constraint in the sense that there's very few animals at all who are really free and wild as they used to be. I mean, it's a tragedy, but that's just the way the world is, and so we've got to deal with it. What do animals feel about what's happening? You know, what is it like to be a lion? What does it feel like to be a lion? What's their point of view? Animals have a point of view, okay? The tide is really changing pretty rapidly, so it's really hard to find a skeptic out there who really wonders whether dogs feel joy when they play or elephants suffer from PTSD. I mean, that's just the silliest. I mean, anybody who questions that, I always say, I'm glad I'm not their dog. Because, I mean, could you imagine living with somebody who ignores the feelings and the heart and the emotions and the desires and needs of other animals? And when people say we don't even really know what animals want and need, of course we know what they want and need. They want to live free, they want to be safe, and they want to live in peace. We can fill in the details. Different species may have different needs, just like different humans do. But when people say, we don't really know this, I'm just thinking, God, get your head out of the sand really now. Yeah, you could, I don't know, there's a few points here. Like, I'm tired of people talking about the resilience of nature. Yeah, I mean, to a point, but it's really clear nature is not infinitely resilient. And then Sarah's really educated me a lot about this One Health initiative, which I think is really important. And just how the health of other animals, humans, and our homes, it's all tied together. And getting back to the Institute for Human-Animal Connection and the hot field of anthrozoology. I mean, there's just nothing today, if you're concerned about animals, that doesn't fall within the guidelines of anthrozoology and the work being done here. This is just really funny. A year ago, I discovered that this book I edited called The Smile of a Dolphin was banned in Texas. My publishers loved it. They thought it was the best PR they ever got. So once again, there are some skeptics out there. So years ago, I developed this idea called minding animals with my dog Jethro. We used to walk every morning really early on the Boulder bike path, and I'd have these great conversations with him. He didn't contribute much, but he listened. he was actually a really good listener. So I developed this idea called minding animals. That means that we take care of other animals and provide a life that is safe and peaceful, and we attribute minds to other animals. And so that's kind of one of my guiding principles for some of my work, and that is that if we always mind animals, we can hope that that would be a partial ingredient of the recipe of making things better. So compassionate conservation is really a growing global movement, and it basically centers on the fact that the well-being, welfare, rights, if you will, of other individuals count. So people who are interested in conservation and environmental ethics often, not always, but most of them concentrate on species, populations, and ecosystems. Sometimes you read about, conservation biology and you forget that animals, non-human animals, are really even involved in the equation. And so compassionate conservation is changing the dialogue where individual animals really come into the discussion. And it's really picked up. There's now a Center for Compassionate Conservation at the University of Technology in Sydney. I'm on their board, and a man named Daniel Ramp runs it. The other thing about compassionate conservation is that it's really cross-disciplinary and bringing in people from all different disciplines, including business people. Because in the end, if you want to make compassion and you want to make saving animals really viable, you have to make it profitable. You just have to. I don't know how many people here heard the talk by Wayne Purcell last year at the Institute where he talked about, I think he talked about compassion economics. We can talk about conservation economics. The bottom line is that money counts, and as it should, okay? The other thing about compassionate conservation that's really important is it brings people into the equation, and it's cross-cultural in the sense that, yeah, it's really easy for me, a good old white Westerner who lives in Boulder, to tell people what to do, but that don't work, and you know that. So really it brings into account cultural views on other animals and their homes. So some of the things that it's concerned about would be keeping animals in zoos or aquaria in the name of conservation and education, captive breeding, how we mark or tag animals, conservation consequences of wildlife rescue, rehabilitation, and release, the reintroduction of animals, the wildlife trade. So it's really broad, and there's people in all countries, many different countries now, focusing on whatever really interests them. So it's very inclusive across disciplines and topics. It stresses that animals are not merely objects or metrics who can be traded off for the good of populations, species, or ecosystems. The guiding principle is first do no harm, and really it leads to peaceful coexistence, okay? And in my eyes, there's nothing more important in getting these agendas off the ground than humane education. And I just really think it's really important. So it forces us into some really difficult topics, trade-offs. Like, is it okay to trade off the life of one wolf for the good of other wolves? Is it okay in these programs where they were going to reintroduce they are reintroducing black-footed ferrets and raising hamsters by the thousands to be practice prey for the ferrets? So that would be an example of trading off one species for the good of another. So people play the numbers game in that and say, well, there's lots of hamsters. Would you put your pet hamster in that situation? okay? So another question you can ask yourself, and I'm doing this a lot, is would you put your dog or another dog in the situation that you put other animals? Dogs are sentient beings, as are millions of the animals with whom we deal, okay? So if you wouldn't put your dog in that situation, why would you do something to another animal? To me, the numbers game doesn't count. I don't really care that there's 1 million rats and 100 of X, okay? That's just my point of view. The important thing about compassionate conservation is it's getting the discussion on the table. And I'm actually talking with people now who, not that they wouldn't talk with me, but they would ignore this agenda. And you can't ignore it anymore. Years ago, Jim Estes, who's a very famous conservation biologist, was dealing with oil-soaked birds from the Exxon disaster. And he said right off the bat is, we need to deal with individual animals. Each one of these oiled birds counts. And although scientists sometimes just block that out, lay people, non-scientists, really focus on individuals. We name our dogs. We don't number them like wildlife biologists number elk or number deer or number wolves, for example. We name them. And that's becoming more accepted now in science. Jane Goodall, of course, is known for naming the chimpanzees with whom she worked in the 60s and being told that you don't name animals, you number them, and that they really don't have personalities. And we know the effect that she's had over the last, 60 years. Okay? So what it does is compassionate conservation, in summary, individualizes animals. And it makes each and every life important. And it means if you want to trade off the life of one animal for the good of another individual, you better have a very compelling argument, or you don't do it. So you have to meet a lot of animals, and I'm just going to go through this because I do meet a lot of animals in my job. So this was a European wolf. I thought it was a coyote, actually, when I first saw it, and it was in Budapest. And there's no coyotes in Budapest. And so this animal had been a pet. And people decided when the animal grew up and started humping everything in the house and tearing everything apart, that they didn't want to live with this animal anymore. So Adam McCloskey here is a very well-known researcher for studying comparative aspects of dog and wolf cognition. So I got to meet this wolf, and I said, is it safe? And he said, I think so. And he's fluent in English, so a lot hung on the word think. Okay, but this is an animal who's doomed to captivity, but is being used, if you will, in some really great experiments, non-invasive, no torturing them, but great cognitive experiments that actually enriches their lives, challenges them to get food, for example. And this is a bear, and the woman in the previous one, Dodie, could play with the bear, and likewise, she said, you want to go in and play with this bear? And I said, is it safe? And she said, well, I think so. And I decided not to, okay? But once again, this bear was a pet of somebody and wound up in this horrible situation. And this was down in Greenwood Village. Remember a couple of years ago, coyotes were a, quote, problem. Of course, the people were the problem. And a lot of coyotes were killed, not knowing who they were or whether they were the, quote, problem. And this was a young male whose mother and father and siblings were killed, and you can tell by his facial expression, he's not really sure about me at all. But it took a while, and slowly but surely, he let me sort of just pet him and tell him that things were okay. They weren't okay, of course. I mean, he's doomed to captivity as well, and he lost his family. Bessie, a dairy cow, compassionate conservation is also concerned with food animals, as it should be. Geraldine, a pig, remember Sarah and I went up to Kindness Ranch, and it's a wonderful, wonderful place that serves as a refuge for former laboratory animals who were tortured and then rescued. And this is Geraldine, wonderful pig. She's on the right. You're right, yeah. This is a chimpanzee I met who was raised as a pet and had severe psychological problems. And the woman who was running this, named Lee, told me that I should just sit with him, and maybe, his name is Yuri, maybe he would come and, talk to me. So I sat and read part of one of my books to him, and the more I read to him out of my book, the less he likely wanted to see me. And But finally, after 4.5 hours, he touched my finger, and then the next day when I went back, he accepted me a lot faster. But once again, it's kind of a tragedy to have these animals in cages, and fully legal in a lot of states to have a pet chimpanzee. You can go online and have one delivered, probably FedEx, the next morning. This is a dingo on Fraser Island in Australia. Healthy female, she looks skinny, and you notice I'm standing behind these women. We were on a tour, and they said, well, how come you're not getting closer? And I said, because I know about these animals. Dingoes had been bothering people who had been bothering them. And the nice thing about Fraser Island is now they've actually put aside certain areas where people can't go to protect the dingoes. Okay? So once again, it's a people problem, not an animal problem. And this is a dog I met. He is the only truly feral dog I've ever met in my life. He was brought in from a pack of wild dogs in southern Italy, having had no human contact. And it was amazing to me to meet him. And if he looked like a husky, and because he behaved a lot like a sort of uncertain wolf, it would have really made sense. But it was wonderful to see the work this woman was doing, okay, in terms of rehabilitating him and bringing him back to normal. And this was this was about a year and a half ago, and apparently he's doing well. These are just cougars, mountains outside of Boulder, cougar by Evergreen. Black bears near my old house, and some of you may have known in the little town of Hygiene there was a standoff between a bear and a cow. Yeah, I think they got upset because they thought that the apples they were theirs, not the others. And this is a little black bear who really needed a haircut by my old home, and we came to a truce. I was one day getting my bike out of my shed, and I turned around, and the bear was not quite as close as Philip's pet giraffe here. And I went, oh, shit, and I threw my bike at the bear, and I ran inside, and the bear went, oh, shit, and ran away. But what was really cool is over the next week, we kind of came to a truce. He hung around, and I could go out, and he would stay maybe, 5 or 10 meters, away from me. And I told somebody this, and they said, oh, well, you should call the Division of Wildlife. And I thought, no, I want this bear here. He and his family, he had sibs from the previous years, and his mom, there were 7 of them, were hanging around my house and had never caused a problem. Ever. Not once. So you just change your ways to accommodate these animals. So I study animal emotions, and one of the important principles is called evolutionary continuity. It comes from Charles Darwin's work. It's the only academic thing I want you to remember today. But really what it says is the differences among species are differences in degree rather than kind. They're shades of gray, not black and white. So if we have different emotions, so too do other animals. So really the bumper sticker, once again, is if we have something, they have it too. So if we experience joy, other animals experience joy. If we experience grief, so too do other animals. And people say, well, their emotions aren't like ours. But they don't have to be like ours. My joy may not be like yours, but it doesn't mean that I have it and you don't, or vice versa. Okay, my pain may not be the same as yours, but that doesn't mean, once again, you have it and I don't, or vice versa. So this is a really important unifying principle. And in the summer, what year is this, 2014, 13? I think it's summer 2012, there was a meeting at the University of Cambridge, and a bunch of scientists, 16 of them, came up with what they call the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness. It's like reinventing the world, but because there was some Nobel Prize winners there, along with Stephen Hawking, who signed this Cambridge Declaration, it now sort of became okay to say other animals are conscious and sentient beings. Great. I kind of looked at it and I thought, oh, wow, where have they been? And there was only one person on this panel who really studied animals without either torturing them or just writing about them without ever really having studied them. But what it did do because I think you should always look for some good among everything, is what it did do is it got it on the map that other animals are conscious beings, okay? I mean, Stephen Hawking is a great physicist. I don't really know what he thinks about other animals. I don't really even care what he thinks about other animals, but he was a signee, okay? This is an important move. And they brought a lot of animals to the table. This is from an article I wrote for New Scientist, and the artist put a fish in because they basically concluded that all mammals have rich and deep emotional lives and are conscious beings. And we know now about fish. So for example, just recently it was discovered that fish use what's called referential or gestural communication. Fish will use their head, just like we will, to point something out. And they'll use their head to point out food to another fish. Okay? It used to be thought that only humans did. I mean, we always think this. Only we do this, and only we wage war in the way we do daily. Okay? So if you want to play that card, play both sides of that card. There's no other animals who are even in the ballpark of being as evil. But now we can add fish to the equation of being sentient, conscious, emotional, and smart beings. We know that fish deal with antidepressant drugs, dopamine, for example, just like humans do, as do bees, okay? So what's really fascinating to me is that every day there's new findings on the emotional and cognitive and even moral lives of animals. And what's really particularly disturbing is that it's not factored into how we treat them. The Federal Animal Welfare Act hasn't been revised since 1986, and we know for the last 8 years that mice are empathic beings, and mice can be tortured, and they are. So 99% of all the animals used in invasive research are not covered by the Animal Welfare Act. We know rats are empathic, and chickens are empathic, for example, okay? And yesterday I was talking to Jessica Pierce, because we're writing this new book, and I'm just throwing this out. It seems to me that given what we know, animals were more humanely treated decades ago than now. I mean, you know, nobody in their right mind decades ago would have thought that animals don't feel joy or pain or grief. Okay, but the science wasn't there. The science is there now, but it hasn't been incorporated into any animal protection regulations or laws or acts, for example. I'm just throwing that out because we were talking and talking, and it just came to me that really, I don't like what people did years ago, but a lot of them said we don't know this, and although we may not have scientifically knew it, now we know it. Okay, so that's an agenda for people to get on. I am constantly writing to people in Washington saying, we know mice are empathic, so why can they be tortured wantonly as disposable test tubes? Okay, I'm just throwing that out because I think it's important. So here are some new findings. Fish use gestural referential communication to tell others the food. Lionfish hunt together and take turns dining. If you looked at the database for this, you might think that you're looking at the data for wolves. Crocodiles use sticks to lure prey. Birds use very sophisticated tools, make and use more than chimpanzees. Jackass penguins get pissed off and lonely. I studied penguins years ago in Antarctica, and for people to think that they're automatons, my God, they are just amazing beings. Rats display regret for what they didn't do, and rats will free trapped rats rather than eat chocolate. This was published in Science magazine. So people go, oh, where was this, in Time or Life? No. Science magazine, where most of my colleagues would like to publish one paper in their long careers, done at University of Chicago. So would I free you rather than eat good dark chocolate? Well, maybe it depends who you are. But the fact of the matter is we know this, and these are the kinds of data that are really sorely missing in revising regulations for how we treat animals. Do animals have a sense of awe, wonder, and mystery? This is a picture of one of Jane Goodall's chimpanzees. Males do this waterfall dance, and she really ponders whether they have spiritual or what we would call religious experiences. So before we close the door on this, if we keep in mind evolutionary continuity, if we have them, so too might they. And I saw this once. I was with Jane at the Mona Chimpanzee Rehabilitation Center north of Barcelona, Spain. And there was a chimpanzee there named Marco who would go into this trance every time there was a thunderstorm. It was like a Southern Baptist Hallelujah revival. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. So I saw this, okay? So it's a real good question to say, what's happening in this chimpanzee's brain? I mean, why is he doing this? Okay, so I just want to say we should really keep the door open, because these recent data on fish using complex forms of communication has blown a lot of minds, as it should. We also know that animals suffer from PTSD. Hope Ferdowsian is a very well-known physician who also works a lot on non-human animals, and she's done a lot of work on mood and anxiety disorders in chimpanzees. But we know, for example, that dogs suffer from them, especially dogs who come back from war. We know elephants suffer from PTSD. Grief. This is Flint, who was an 8.5-year-old chimpanzee whose mother Flo died, and within a couple of weeks he died. He stopped playing, he stopped traveling with his group, he stopped eating, and then was found dead not far from Flo's body. Okay, and so you could ask, what would have happened if someone went in there and took some of Flint's blood? Well, I bet you would see the same changes that you would see in humans suffering from deep grief. In terms of compassionate conservation, this was taken at the David Sheldrick Elephant Rescue Center in Nairobi. I know some of you have been there. And this is an elephant who saw, heard, and smelled his family being slaughtered, suffered from great PTSD, depression, and they were just trying to rehabilitate her. And I actually did what he did. You put your hand in their mouth and you can feel the entire weight of the elephant just go, because they're soothed and they're relaxed. So when people say to me, well, we don't really have evidence that dogs or other animals suffer from deep grief and depression, you just have to see these animals to know. If you ever lived with 2 dogs, and Sarah says, I have 10 minutes. Oh, shoot, okay. Well, we started late. Oh, okay. Okay, no, I'll make it maybe 11 minutes. But so the big question is, why do animal feelings matter, okay? We know what animals want and need. They want to live in peace and safety just like we do. What are we going to do with what we know? You can read all this, and I love this bumper sticker, this refrigerator bag, that never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. I mean, you could apply that, I suppose, to political parties, but I'm not going to. We need to be consistent in our feelings about animals, okay? I read this great article a few days ago, and it's a topic, just like people don't want to talk that there's too many of us, right? I mean, overpopulation's the major problem. People don't like talking about their meal plans, but we need to. And I read this really compelling article in, I can't remember if it was Biological Conservation, once again, a good journal, that said basically that our meal plans are conservation issues. I mean, they are. But, so when people say we love animals and then we eat or harm them, and I say it, I'm glad they don't love me, once again, we really need to be consistent with our feelings, okay? There was a meeting on compassionate conservation in Chengdu in 2011, run by Jill Robinson, and the wonderful message there was that we need to think out of the box and come up with creative solutions and move out of our comfort zones. We're not going to make progress if we don't move out of our comfort zones. Some recent videos that are really popular and really compelling and making a difference would be these 4, and of course Blackfish is basically causing the death of SeaWorld, as it should. Okay, so people go, oh, these don't really matter, people don't watch them. Yeah, they do. CNN picked up Blackfish, and it was very, very popular, and of course the Cove. So, just reviewing, compassionate conservation would be first, do no harm. Animals are not property. We don't own them. And I always say that we are constantly making decisions about who lives and who dies and why. Okay? Breeding programs in zoos, the Marius effect, I call it. You probably heard that a giraffe named Marius was killed at the Copenhagen Zoo because he didn't fit into their breeding program. And then they later killed 4 lions at the same zoo, okay? So these animals aren't breeding machines. You know, we criticize puppy mills, so why don't we criticize elephant mills, zoos that get elephants just to breed them, okay? Or kill animals because they are perfectly otherwise healthy, but they don't fit into breeding programs. And that's Marius over there. You know, once again, you could read this. A bear cub was killed at a zoo in Switzerland because they were afraid that his father was going to kill him. Hello? No, seriously. You know, people go, oh, this doesn't happen. About 7,000 animals a year are killed, otherwise healthy animals are killed in European zoos. I don't know the data for American zoos. It's a lot. Animals are shipped all over like musical chairs. The Denver Zoo brings in an elephant 2 years ago who they didn't even know would get along with the other elephants to make him a breeding machine, okay? No good, okay? And those are the kinds of issues that compassionate conservation is concerned with. What are some of the things that people are doing? They use guard dogs to protect livestock, fencing or flaggery to protect livestock rather than poisoning or shooting individuals, using live traps rather than snares or leg-home traps, using humane methods of tagging animals, et cetera, et cetera. The important thing about compassionate conservation, taking into account the well-being of other animals, is you produce less stressed animals, and people are becoming to see that the data from a lot of these studies are unreliable, because you're studying the movement patterns, the reproductive behavior, the social behavior of stressed animals, not animals who aren't stressed. So this is a really big move in that compassion can make for better science, and they don't have to apologize for being compassionate. In Cape Peninsula in South Africa, they're using paintball markers to deter baboons. And not only does that keep the baboons away, but it marks them so we know who individuals are. I love when, for example, I live in Boulder, and Division of Wildlife, or whatever they're called now, comes in and shoots a bear saying, well, we think that that was the problem animal. You think they were? Hello? Well, I mean, let's be real, okay? So I love the idea of paintball markers because you identify animals, you know who they are, and it works. And once again, in Turkey, where you wouldn't expect a lot of compassion, fences are being used, okay? So compassionate conservation is having an effect. Some of you have seen this slide. It's one of my faves. It's going to just end off briefly with the work that Jill Robinson does in China, rescuing moon bears. That's Jill on your left, of course. She founded Dr. Dog years ago, bringing dogs to assisted living centers, into hospitals. I saw something on the news a few months ago. Brian Williams, who puts me to sleep, but he had this really great story about bringing animals into assisted living centers and into cancer treatment centers in America as if it was something new. I mean, come on, they've been doing this for years. You know, Jill does work on rescuing moon bears, and Haley here was a vet tech, and that's a cage that Fonzie was kept in. That's me feeding her. Fonzie grew up in a cage this big and was fed. That's Jasper, my boyfriend, and Jasper was kept in this cage for 15 years. There's a catheter right here for collecting bile. That's me feeding Jasper, and here's where the hope comes from. And this is Jasper today. Great ears. You know, you can use him to pick up satellite TV outside of Chengdu. This is his, this video, if it works. Oh, shoot. How do you, is it going to work? Oh, it's on my desktop. Well, I'm sorry you can't see it. Some of you have seen it. It's one of the moon bears dancing in the water. It's really awesome. I don't see it. Click on the picture itself. I told you I was technologically compromised. A new rescue in China, in Nanning. Unprecedented, a bear farm is being turned into a bear sanctuary. Just really amazing. And this is a bear who I adopted. My mother's name was Beatrice, so this is Beatrice, and they have to capitalize the R. I think I have a thing for bears with big ears. But anyway, Beatrice, she's beautiful, but you can't believe what she looked like when she was first rescued, after spending years in a cage being tortured. It's a group of 4 women in Medellin, Colombia, up here, who got some people elected to the Chamber of Commerce in Medellin. No small task. And Joanna over here on the left, Julia, wanted to quit constantly, and I said, you can't quit. And then now they have a dog rescue program where it basically says, adopt a dog. That's another thing, we don't need any more dog breeders. Okay, with all the dogs in the world being euthanized, and 75% of all dogs in the world are on their own. I just learned that statistic. A role model. I do a lot of work with Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots groups, and a lot of young girls, you know, and boys, but a lot of girls say, oh, I can't make a difference. So this is my friend Lilani Munter. She's a NASCAR driver. She's got a biology degree, and her motto is never estimate a vegetarian hippie chick with a race car. And the reason that I really love talking about her is because she's what we call this uncommon messenger. She's introducing vegan food to NASCAR events. And the vegan food tent is actually really popular. Her car, when she was driving a few years ago, is called the Cove. She is now driving a totally carbon-free race car at 200 miles an hour, 1 inch off the, whatever you call it, the fender of other cars. Okay? I mean, I get nervous driving here in the morning on the Denver-Boulder Turnpike. Okay? So she's making a difference. She's a really great role model. So just summarizing and ending, these would be my guiding principles. Do no intentional harm, respect all life, treat all individuals with respect and dignity, and tread lightly when stepping into their worlds. I love this quote from Nelson Mandela saying, we must exceed our own expectations. We don't have to apologize for having a sense of wonder or for being compassionate. And that really, the Animal Manifesto, as I wrote in the book, is animals are asking us to treat them better, or treat us better, or leave us alone. And I think that this just summarizes how I see compassionate conservation playing a role in the future. And it's really an exciting time to be what I would call a conservation scientist. I get letters, I guess you get emails, nobody writes letters anymore, but I get emails constantly from prospective undergraduates and graduate students. I'm working with a girl in Boulder who wants to be a conservation biologist. She's in 8th grade, and she wants to be an ethologist, so I've got her doing a study of dog play at one of the local parks. And because, I mean, she has limited resources. I had a really lovely email from a sophomore in high school who basically said he had read a lot of my books and other books, and I said, oh, you did? My students don't. But he already knows what he wants to do. So really, and these people are very compassionate about animals, so they're the wave of the future. Kids are the wave of the future. And I think the most important 2 messages here is that ethics needs to be firmly implanted in conservation biology, even if it moves us outside our professional and personal comfort zones. And poor conservation outcomes and unreliable data, word missing, are often consistent with the mistreatment of animals. And every meeting I've been to for compassionate conservation, even at the international meetings for conservation biology last year, they accepted our symposium on compassionate conservation. It was very competitive. People were really upset. I mean, some people were really upset. They said, how could they have this fluffy stuff? But we were very pleased. And we had an international group there and a good audience. And finally, we got on the table the importance that compassion isn't misplaced sentiment, okay? That these animals have feelings, and their feelings really count. And compassion begets compassion. I have a new book coming out called Rewilding Our Hearts. actually mentions a lot in the Institute for Human-Animal Connection here, and the importance of undoing the unwilding. Education systems unwild kids. It just does. And that we all need a good dose of rewilding. And once again, that's Jasper on this hammock. And I really do look to these animals and others, but as sort of, mediums for hope. I mean, we've called the experience that Jasper had, and somehow he came out of it, and he's able to forgive. We don't know if he's forgotten. I'm sure he has flashbacks. But it's kind of just an example that hard work really pays off, and that everyone who can do something should do something. We need to remember that most people in the world can't do anything. They're fighting for their next meal. So I always say that as time goes on and the problems increase, the relative proportion of people who can do something actually decreases. And so those who can do something, they must do it. I don't like to be prescriptive, but you got to do something. We can't be what people call pejoratively slacktivists. You talk about something, but you don't do anything. So activism is really the name of the game for the future. So thank you.